She knew the law. She enforced the law. But tonight, as the police lights flared in her rearview mirror, she realized a different truth. Justice didn't always side with the right. And the worst part? They had no idea they had just pulled over the wrong person. Veronica's sedan cut through the stillness of the empty highway, its headlights carving a narrow path in the dark. The dashboard clock read 12:17 a.m. The city lights were miles behind her now, and only the occasional road sign broke the monotony of the long, open stretch. It had been a long day. Briefings, security meetings, endless discussions about national threats. Being the director of the FB, I meant long nights and even longer responsibilities. She adjusted her grip on the wheel, rolling her shoulders to ease the stiffness. The road ahead was clear, smooth, uneventful. Then, flash. Blue and red lights flickered in the rearview mirror. A siren whooped once, just enough to cut through the night. Veronica's hands tensed, her gaze flicking to the speedometer. Exactly 65 miles per hour. No sudden movements, no erratic driving, no reason to be pulled over. Her mind ran through the possibilities. A routine stop? Unlikely. A mistaken identity? Maybe. She exhaled, signaling as she eased onto the shoulder. The police cruiser followed, stopping a few feet behind. But as she shifted into park, something felt wrong. The officer didn't step out immediately. Seconds passed, then more. A standard stop would have the officer approaching within moments. This delay, it wasn't hesitation. It was calculated. Veronica adjusted her rearview mirror, trying to get a look. The outline of a figure sat motionless in the driver's seat, the silhouette barely visible through the dim glow of the dashboard. No radio chatter, no movement. Then, finally, the door creaked open. A tall figure emerged, moving with slow, deliberate strides. His hand rested close to his gun. The flashlight snapped on. Veronica barely had time to register the blinding glare before the voice followed. "Step out of the vehicle." No greeting, no explanation, just a command. Her fingers curled against the leather of the steering wheel. This wasn't just a traffic stop, and she knew, without a doubt, this wasn't a mistake. Veronica didn't move. The beam of the flashlight stayed locked on her face. Too long, too harsh, intentional. Her grip on the wheel remained steady, her breathing even. "I said step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated, his tone sharper. Veronica kept her hands visible, flicking her gaze toward his badge. D. Kearns, not a name she recognized. His stance was aggressive, his hand resting just a little too close to his holster. She moved slowly, reaching into her jacket pocket. "I'd like to know the reason for this stop, officer," she said evenly. Kearns didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, the crunch of his boots against the asphalt the only response. Veronica pulled out her ID wallet, flipping it open to reveal her credentials. FBI Director Veronica Holt. She extended it toward him, her fingers relaxed. Silence. Then, a chuckle. Low, humorless. Kearns didn't take the ID. His eyes flickered across the badge, then back to her face. "FBI?" he scoffed. "I've seen that trick before." He didn't even pretend to inspect it. A slow, deliberate thud echoed as he slapped his palm against the roof of her car. "That's supposed to scare me?" His grin widened. Veronica didn't flinch. "It should make you rethink what you're doing." His smirk faded just a fraction. Then, with exaggerated slowness, he leaned in slightly. "You're gonna step out of this car, now." The calm veneer in his voice was thin, stretched over something volatile. He wasn't asking. He was daring her to resist. Veronica held his gaze. "And if I refuse?" Kearns' expression darkened. He took another step forward, invading her space. "You won't like what happens next," he said. The way he said it, the certainty in his tone, made her stomach tighten. She inhaled slowly. Then, keeping her movements deliberate, she unclipped her seatbelt and opened the door. Kearns stepped back, watching as she rose to her full height. She was tall, but he was taller. He barely let her shut the door before taking a step closer, tilting his chin down at her. "You always this difficult, Director?" His voice dripped sarcasm. "I follow protocol," she said simply. "You should try it sometime." Kearns' jaw flexed. "Turn around. Hands on the hood." Veronica's patience thinned. "For what reason?" "For my safety," Kearns said. "And yours." He reached for her wrist. She pulled back instantly. "Cautious," she said, her voice flat. "That's good. But you're crossing a line." Kearns's smirk returned. "You think that badge puts you above a stop?" "I think that badge means you should reconsider what you're doing," Veronica countered. Kearns exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Then, without warning, he reached for her wrist again, tighter this time. Veronica yanked her arm free, stepping back. "That's assault, officer." His nostrils flared. "You think anyone's gonna care?" She narrowed her eyes. "They will when I file my report." Kearns let out a laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't seem to get how this works." Then he shoved her. Not hard enough to knock her down, just enough to make a point. Veronica steadied herself. Enough. She met his gaze, cold and unwavering. "That's twice now. Want to go for 3? Kearns's smirk twitched. His hand hovered over his belt. Then he made his choice. With one smooth motion, he unholstered his gun. The click of the safety disengaging was deafening. Veronica froze, her pulse steady, her hands staying where he could see them. He raised the barrel just enough, not quite pointed at her. Not yet. "Now," he said, his voice quieter, deadlier. "Let's try this again." Veronica's eyes dropped, just for a second, to his grip. His finger curled slightly over the trigger. One wrong move, and everything would be over. The night air felt heavier. Kearns stood firm, his arm extended, the muzzle of his gun leveled directly at Veronica's chest. His stance was solid, but she caught it. The almost imperceptible tension in his fingers, the slight twitch of his jaw. He was forcing control, but he was losing it. "Not so tough now, are you?" His voice was low, almost mocking. "What's wrong? No backup this time?" Veronica didn't move, didn't speak. She kept her gaze steady, unwavering. His smirk widened. He lifted the gun slightly, as if testing her reaction. "I asked you a question," Kearns said, voice edged with impatience. "Do you still think you're in charge here?" She tilted her head slightly. "That's what this is about, isn't it?" Kearns narrowed his eyes. "You don't like when someone doesn't play along," Veronica continued, her voice even. "You push them, threaten them, and if they don't submit," her eyes flicked briefly to the gun, "you make sure they do." Kearns exhaled sharply through his nose. "Step back." "I'm already standing where you want me," Veronica said. He clenched his teeth. "Then get on the ground." The words came out too fast. Rash. Veronica caught the shift in his posture. He wasn't in control. He was trying to convince himself that he was. "Not going to happen," she replied. A muscle in Kearns' jaw twitched. "Then you're going to regret it." He adjusted his grip. And then, "Hey!" The voice cut through the thick silence like a gunshot. Kearns flinched. Just barely, but Veronica saw it. His head snapped toward the sound. A man stood a few feet away, half in shadow, holding his phone high. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, the red recording dot unmistakable. "You're live, officer," the man said, his voice firm. "Keep going. Let's see what happens next." Kearns' breathing shifted, shallower now. His grip on the gun tightened as his eyes darted between Veronica and the camera. For the first time, he hesitated. Veronica saw it, the flicker of uncertainty. the realization sinking in. She held her ground. "What's wrong, officer? You were so sure of yourself a second ago." Kern's head jerked back toward her. "Shut up." But there was no more confidence in his tone. For the first time tonight, he wasn't the one controlling the situation. And he knew it. The silence after the lieutenant's words was suffocating. "That's the director of the FBI." Kearns didn't move. His face was frozen, eyes flickering between Veronica, the man recording, and the police radio clipped to his vest, the one he hadn't used. Then, from that same radio, a voice crackled to life. "Unit 47, what's your status?" "We have a traffic stop flagged at your location." Veronica's stomach tightened. Someone else, had reported the stop. Kearns swallowed, his throat bobbing. His hesitation was brief, but undeniable. His jaw clenched as he reached for the radio. His voice, when it came, was forced, strained. "Control, I've got it handled." A pause. Then, "That wasn't the question." Dispatch logged a request for backup. "Who called it in?" Veronica's eyes flicked toward the man recording. He lifted his chin slightly, just enough for her to understand. It was him. Kearns' fingers twitched on his belt. He turned toward the witness, expression darkening. "You made a call?" The man didn't flinch. "I wasn't going to stand here and watch you kill someone." The words landed hard. Kearns' body went rigid, his face twisting in barely concealed rage. Then, tires on gravel, bright headlights cut through the darkness, flooding the scene with light. A second police cruiser pulled in fast, rolling to a stop behind Kearns' vehicle. The unmistakable hum of an engine idling, the quick creak of a door swinging open. A uniformed lieutenant stepped out, his posture tense. His eyes swept over the scene. Veronica standing still, hands visible. Kearns still gripping his gun, and the bystander, phone raised high. "What the hell is going on here?" Kearns turned, but he wasn't quick enough. The lieutenant's gaze snapped to Veronica. The briefest moment of confusion, then his face paled. His voice came out clipped, sharp. "That's the director of the FBI." The words hit like a hammer. Kearns' body locked up. His breath hitched. His grip on the gun trembled just slightly. But Veronica caught it. He knew. The lieutenant's expression hardened. "Put the gun down. Now." Veronica stayed silent, watching Kearns carefully. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The calculation, the sheer weight of his realization. There was no getting out of this. Not this time. Kearns hesitated, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Then, with visible reluctance, he slowly lowered the gun. His arm trembled as he uncurled his fingers, letting the weapon drop into the lieutenant's outstretched hand. The moment it left his grasp, his entire body seemed to sag. The lieutenant's voice was cold. "Turn around." Kearns didn't move. "Now." His lips pressed into a tight line, but he obeyed. The metallic snap of handcuffs cut through the night. Veronica stepped forward, slow, deliberate. She stopped just beside him, her voice low but sharp. "You asked me earlier if I still felt powerful." Kearns clenched his jaw. She let the moment stretch, then delivered the final blow. "Now you have your answer." The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut, and Kearns' body jerked against the restraint. His breathing was sharp, erratic, the kind that belonged to a man who had spent his entire life untouchable, and had just realized that had changed. The lieutenant kept his grip firm, yanking Kearns' arms behind his back with calculated indifference. There was no hesitation, no sympathy, just routine. "This is a mistake," Kearns spat, his voice trembling. "You don't know what you're doing." No one responded. The other officers stood in a tense semicircle, their gazes locked on the scene. None of them moved to help him. None of them spoke. The silence told Veronica everything she needed to know. They had seen this before. Kearns twisted in place, his breath coming faster. This is wrong! She resisted, she—" His head snapped around, searching for someone, anyone, to agree with him. Nothing. His chest rose and fell, panic seeping into his features. Veronica took a step forward, slow, deliberate. Kern's eyes locked onto hers, anger battling with something else, desperation. He had spent the entire night trying to keep control, and now it was slipping through his fingers like sand. She stopped a foot away, hands loose at her sides. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone did the work. "You asked me earlier if I still felt powerful," she said. Kearns's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Veronica tilted her head slightly, letting the moment stretch just long enough for it to sink in. Then, she gave him the final blow. "Now you have your answer." Kearns swallowed, but it didn't stop his hands from shaking. For the first time all night, he had nothing to say. Veronica let the silence breathe. Let him sit in it. Then, she turned to the lieutenant. "Get him out of here." Kearns stiffened as the lieutenant tightened his grip, dragging him toward the patrol car. "No!" Kearns shouted, the pitch of his voice rising. "This isn't happening! This isn't happening!" Still, no one responded. The lieutenant reached for the back door handle and pulled. It creaked open, waiting. Kearns dug his heels in, his body jerking against the hold. It was useless. He might as well have been fighting gravity itself. "Listen to me," his voice cracked. "You can't do this, A hand on his shoulder. A rough push forward. With one final heave, he was forced inside. Veronica didn't move, didn't blink. She just watched. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed, final, absolute. Kearns was done, and he knew it. Inside the car, Kearns thrashed, his shoulders jerking against the seat. The cuffs dug into his wrists as he twisted, the panic in his eyes flickering between anger and realization. His voice, muffled by the thick glass, still carried through. "You don't understand. I'll fight this. I'll—" The words cut off as he threw his weight against the door, as if there were still a chance it might open. It didn't. Veronica exhaled slowly. She had heard it all before. Every man like him thought the same thing. That they were untouchable. That rules didn't apply to them. That this moment, right here, was never supposed to happen to them. They never saw it coming until it was too late. The lieutenant came to stand beside her, his expression unreadable. "We'll process him at the station," he said. "Internal affairs will take it from there." Veronica gave a slight nod, but her gaze never left Kearns. Through the tinted window, his movements had slowed. His yelling had turned to rapid, shallow breaths. His shoulders were hunched, his head slightly bowed, not in submission, but in the crushing weight of what was happening. The cruiser's engine rumbled to life. The officer in the driver's seat adjusted the radio, exchanging clipped words with dispatch. "Unit 47, transporting one detainee. Advise IA of incoming case." A pause. Then the response crackled through. "Copy. Unit 47. IA notified." Veronica's eyes flickered toward Kearns one last time. His rage was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but fear had finally taken root. For the first time tonight, he wasn't barking orders. He wasn't making threats. He was just a man sitting in the back of a squad car, knowing his career, his reputation, his entire existence was about to collapse. The cruiser shifted into gear, rolling forward. The red and blue lights spun lazily, reflecting off the pavement as the car pulled away. Veronica stood in place, watching the taillights shrink into the distance. She didn't feel satisfaction, didn't feel relief, just a familiar weight settling in her chest. She had been here before, too many times to count. She had seen officers like Kearns walk away with nothing but a slap on the wrist. She had seen cases buried, excuses made, careers protected at the expense of the people who were supposed to be safe. Would this time be different? She didn't know, but she knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't the first time she had seen this happen, and it wouldn't be the last. Veronica slid into the driver's seat, shutting the door with a quiet click. She exhaled, steadying herself as the distant glow of patrol lights faded in her rearview mirror. She turned the key. The engine hummed to life. The radio crackled, cutting into the silence. Breaking news tonight. Footage has surfaced of a disturbing incident involving law enforcement and the director of the FBI. The department has confirmed an internal investigation is now underway. Veronica didn't react. She simply listened. The world was finally seeing it. The truth. She reached for the volume knob, turning it down just slightly. Then, after a pause, she spoke, soft but firm. Justice doesn't happen on its own. It exists because people refuse to stay silent. The screen faded to black. If you witness injustice, don't look away. Speak up. Share this story, because everyone deserves a chance at justice.